All right, welcome to our Athlete Soul educational webinar. Today is actually a conversation with quite a few people from the athletic world. We're going to be talking about the impact of name, image, and likeness on our athletes and their mental health and well-being. I am Miriam Glaze. I'm the founder of Athlete Soul. I'm a former athlete myself. I'm joined here with a lot of former athletes and professional in the sport industry who work with athletes, whether it's professional, collegiate, or on the private side. And we're going to be talking with you guys about that really interesting topic. I think we've been talking a lot about NIL in the last few months as everything was changing, but I'm not sure that we've covered the mental health side as much. So super excited to hear about this conversation. The event is recorded as usual. We will be sharing it with our participant and on our website as well after the event. And you can ask questions throughout the conversation. We'll go with the panel discussion first and we'll do your question at the end of the conversation, but feel free to ask your questions throughout the discussion. You can do that in the Q&A box or in the chat, whatever you prefer. I will be taking notes of the question and asking them to Alicia or in the panel. And now I'm going to pass it on to Alicia, who is going to be our moderator for today. And I'll let you introduce yourself, Alicia. On to you.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. It's so great to be here. I'm excited to moderate this exciting conversation. My name is Alicia Jessup. I'm an associate professor of sport law at Pepperdine University. I'm a lawyer by trade and also a sports writer for two sites, The Athletic and The Washington Post. So for the last decade, I've really devoted much of my professional career to helping get college athletes this right, the right being the ability to benefit from their name, image, and likeness. I saw it as a wrong in the system, and we can talk about that if we want, but the fact that college athletes were dedicating upwards of 60 hours per week to athletics departments, generating in some cases hundreds of millions of dollars, yet sometimes not even being able to feed themselves, get diapers for their child, so on and so forth. I saw it as truly a civil injustice. So on July 1st of this year, the first name, image, and likeness bill, not the first drafted, but the first to go into effect, came into effect in the state of Florida. But 10 days before that, on June 21st, 2021, the Supreme Court ruled in a case called Alston versus NCAA that the NCAA limiting the educational benefits provided to college athletes violated antitrust law. So as Savannah can attest to, this has been a long, interesting legal journey to get to where we are today. We've talked a lot about this in society, on ESPN, on The Athletic. We've talked about the money that is flowing in now, finally, to college athletes. And that's what excites me so much about the conversation we're going to have today, is we're talking about something else that's just as important, the athlete's mental health and their well-being. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to open us up with the conversation, but I think for the purposes of individuals listening, if in your response, you can tell us a little bit about who you are, how you come into this place of name, image, and likeness. And I know we also have some former NCAA athletes with us today. If you can tell us what your sport was, what your tie-in is, that'd be great. So again, I'm going to ask the question, we're going to answer the question, and then who are you? What's your connection to all of this? The broad opening question is, how is name, image, and likeness going to impact the life of college athletes? So I'm going to take it to Derek first.
All right. Thank you, Alicia. My name is Derek Cox, and for myself, I played collegiate football at William & Mary. After graduating from William & Mary, I went on to play professional football in the NFL for 7 seasons. And after retiring from football, I transitioned into grad school, and I just finished my MBA at UCLA. And so now I'm pursuing after a career as a contract advisor, representing players as a sports agent. And currently I'm studying to get my certification for the Canadian Football League, so I can represent players in that league. And to your question, Alicia, about how this will impact student athletes, I think there's a mix of ways that it can hit and approach athletes, from the standpoint of the money that they make, how that can impact them mentally and amongst their teammates. But then also, I think there's a side to it where trying to acquire these deals and get the exposure and awareness. I think additionally, what you're going to put yourselves up against is the exposure on social media, where you're exposed to billions of people that can attack you in various ways, from unsolicited abusive comments that people can do within the sports industry, especially the competitive nature that's behind it. So I think that there's a mix of ways that you can get hit as a student athlete, and you definitely have to be prepared.
Awesome. We'll definitely dig more into the social media component and then the time constraints with securing deals. Those are really great call outs. I'm going to move next to Stephanie.
Good afternoon, everyone. Congratulations, Derek, on that MBA. My name is Stephanie Coakley. I'm the Senior Associate Athletic Director for Mental Health, Wellness, and Performance at Temple University. And I've been in the role in December will be the beginning of my 5th year. I come into this space certainly as somebody who is here to serve student athletes, their needs, primarily their mental health needs. But as we know, the brain controls the body. And so what happens up top definitely affects performance on the field of competition, as well as in the classroom. And so I've been in an observer role for right now because it is all so new. I mean, we think that we know how this will turn out, but we actually don't. And so I'm just collecting data at this particular moment and being an observer, because if you think about it, this generation of student athletes is developing the playbook for whether there's longevity in this, what it looks like in the future. And so that's how I come to this space, but certainly as somebody who cares about and serves student athletes' mental health and well-being, I am an observer right now.
I love that. I love that definition. It's great to meet you, Stephanie, and be with you here today. I'm going to move next to Savannah.
Hi, everybody. Savannah Barrows here, also dubbed as the protector of athletes. What do I do in my professional life? I am a licensed attorney. I represent people in business, also my athletes in business, employment, sports, and entertainment. I am a former athlete, so some of the challenges that you are experiencing or have experienced, I probably have been there. Also, the host of What Are You Sporting About? A podcast and author of 2 books that actually hit the bestsellers list, What Are You Sporting About?, which inspired the podcast, as well as our new book, Athletes Making Moves, all about name, image, and likeness, and the author of a children's series called JoJo's Legal Adventures, inspired by my beautiful little son. 2 books out there right now called JoJo Learns About Credibility and JoJo Learns About Voting, which breaks down legal concepts for kids in a way that they can understand. To your question, Alicia, around impact on NIL and college life with these athletes, the first thing I always thinking about, especially from the mental health perspective, is how are these student athletes going to balance work life? And in a sense, like, they already do it, right? But with NIL, I feel like it's going to be a lot more top heavy. You're already used to working in terms of your sport and going to your practices and performing, and then trying to balance that with your school life and your school work. But now with coming into the realm of being a person who actually owns a business or building some form of brand, now we're getting to a place where you're really more so top heavy on that aspect. And what are the remnants of the mental health issues that are going to play out to that? And so I know we got a long time, to talk about those situations, but that is the first thing that I really think about, especially from a legal perspective, and how these student athletes will have the information available to them to navigate these spaces.
I love that. And everyone buy her books. They sound awesome. So, okay, Chelsea, last but certainly not least, I'm just working my way around the square.
I'm Chelsea Day. I am a sports psychologist at The Ohio State University. I was a diver at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, the greatest place on earth. and went from my undergrad to pursue my doctorate in clinical psychology. So I am a clinical sports psychologist, meaning that my greatest emphasis is on the mental health of sport, particularly college student athletes is my specialty, though I've worked with high school athletes, pro athletes, Olympic athletes, and everything in between. I am, I guess, maybe fortunate and unfortunate is that because I'm at Ohio State, we certainly had some of the biggest and earliest NIL deals. And so we are seeing the ramifications in real time. And, Derek mentioned the team dynamics and the challenges there. And so, we know that social support is huge. And so mental health and social support are certainly intertwined. And when those social dynamics start to shift, we've seen some of that. I mean, you've seen our quarterback payouts in the news, certainly. We've got things like in the first handfuls of weeks, our volleyball team had far more deals than even our football team by number of deals. And so they're like top ranked in the country. The demands on them are huge. And so the things that I'm seeing are kind of those similar things, that time management. I think a lot of the deals that we're seeing are social media based. And I think that one thing that our student athletes didn't recognize is that when someone kind of signed you to a social media deal, they have the final say. So you might have to go back and re-edit and re-edit and re-edit. And I think that is something that has been very overwhelming for student athletes in terms of time management, in terms of self-care practices, in terms of that frustration and perfectionism kicking in. When a company says that wasn't good enough, here's what we need, and you have to go back and do it again. Seeing some anxiety around that and maybe not recognizing what they got themselves into. So, I think a lot of the things that have already been said are showing up for us pretty significantly. And then there's the added piece of, so many student athletes, and Alicia, like you mentioned, are trying to pay for diapers and, send money back home to care for families. So now there's an additional pressure and stress to get the deals, regardless of what the demand is. So I need to get the deal to make the money to send home or to care for my family, but I can't manage it and it's overwhelming. And now I am kind of spiraling into this chaos. And it's a lot harder to figure out good solutions once the ink on that contract has dried. And so, I think those are a lot of the things that we're seeing early on, and I'm certain are only going to get more and more complicated.
Oh, we have so much to talk about. This is going to be really interesting. So thank you all for those incredible answers. I'm going to start with the theme of balance, because that's something that I heard emerge from all of you. We have former professional and NCAA athletes with us, and I believe the audience understands the demands on an athlete's time, because I believe most in our audience have some sort of deep connection to athletics. But there was a research study a few years ago that said the average NCAA football player spends 60 hours per week during the season on football related activities. One of my dearest friends in the professional athletic space is a man named Troy Polamalu. We all know who Troy is. He's a Hall of Famer. Troy destroyed my Denver Broncos. He crushed it as a football player. But if you think back to his sponsorships, he could have created an incredible sponsorship profile. He had won. He had won with Head and Shoulders. His hair was insured for $1 million. That was specific because Troy realized his wealth was going to be made on the football field, and anything in addition to that was ancillary wealth. But he knew to make his wealth on the football field, he had to devote tons of time to being the greatest safety in NFL history. So I want to talk a little bit about strategies that this generation of NCAA athletes should be employing to balance this gift of their athleticism versus this opportunity potentially for another gift being endorsement income. So we're going to try something, but I'll let you unmute yourselves. Who has a thought on how they should be approaching balancing these two opportunities?
I'm a big believer in structure. I think that one thing, and my experience as an athlete is when I graduated, I really had no idea how to structure my own stuff. I was so used to being told what time to show up places. You know, I had my classes I needed to show up to. I had practices then to go to in the afternoon, and I had study tables. I had all this stuff. And so life was very scheduled for me. And so when we add these extra things, I think that it can be hard for student athletes to figure out how to kind of manually schedule themselves. And so they're really just jamming it in wherever they can, which means they're not making time for the things they have to do to recharge themselves. And so, you know, it can be hard for me to convince student athletes to think more about structure and include more structure. However, one thing I preach a lot, and I'm sure, you know, everyone in this call does, is also scheduling in that self-care stuff, those strategies for decompressing that, you know, I know that we're all probably guilty of it, and our student athletes are even more guilty of it, is, oh, when I have time, I will do a pleasurable activity or a hobby. When I have time never happens. And so it's figuring out how to build that time in and to honor that time as much as you honor your time that you have to go to practice. You're going to show up to practice. You don't really have a choice. We need to show up for self-care as if we don't have a choice in that as well. And so that's what I talk a lot about, is if you've committed from 7:30 to 8, that this is when you learn how to draw elephants on YouTube videos, you need to sit down. That is not a negotiable. That is not something that you can toss away to go do an activity. That needs to be just as important.
I love that. And I want to learn how to draw elephants on YouTube. So that's what I'll be doing tonight. Derek, I saw you jump in.
One thing that I'm thinking, just to piggyback off of what Chelsea was stating, is additionally, the athletic departments, they're going to need to support these athletes and provide the resources. I can't think of the name of one of the companies, one of the main ones that stepped out there. I know Influencer is another one that stepped out, and they have a platform where it's essentially allowing these universities to disseminate their media or content that they have that they want to get to the athletes. And so I think not only will you need to do that, but you'll need to have some form of content creation that you can help these athletes develop and utilize so that they can grow their social media following and acquire the NIL deals that they're looking for.
I love that idea. I love it. And we're going to get to social media. Stephanie.
So Chelsea referred to structure. I'm just going to use another word, setting boundaries. And, you know, for some, it's going to be having to select and choose and set the boundary that I will take 2 deals, or I will take 1 really good deal instead of 7 really not great deals that you have to like then devote time and attention and energy to, and take time and attention and energy from the things that you're already doing and responsible for. So I want to encourage our student athletes to be selective and make choices that are aligned with their values. And so not just, I mean, it's great to be able to make money, but running after money, that might lead you into a place that's not really aligned with your values. So if you don't use cannabis, okay, I'm gonna stay away from stuff, but if you don't use that, like, you know, that might not be something that you want to endorse. If that's not in keeping with your values, like if you do, then okay. So that's one. And then also just learning how to say no, because saying no frees you up to then say yes to the thing that's actually going to be good for you. So I would say setting some boundaries, learning truly to be selective and say no to things that are not in keeping with what you want to promote, represent. Yeah, that would be my suggestion.
I love it. Savannah, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to kind of take that selective word, but in a different way, being selective about who is around you, your friends or the professionals who you go and seek advice from, like a mentor. You need to make sure that the mentors actually are real mentors. And that's why even in my books, I call them qualified mentors, because somebody can call themselves a mentor, but they may not be. But the other piece of being selective is having a form of accountability. There was a study I had ran across for my former book launch from the American Society of Training and Development, and it showed that a person, if they commit 65% to themselves, they can achieve a goal about 65% of the time. But if they have an accountability partner, then their ability to achieve a particular goal increases up to 95%. And so I think that goes to Stephanie's point about being selective about certain things, but also being selective about who you choose to have in your circle, because building the right team will help you then to, receive the best advice to say, okay, this is the project that I really should be investing time in. So then that way, like Chelsea said, you're able to better structure where it is that you want to go. And now you know what time, how much time you should be devoting to certain things.
I love that. So much wisdom all around. How I've seen this entire space is a huge opportunity for education. The NCAA has an education focused mission, and in a lot of my battles over there, I've attempted to iterate that allowing college athletes to have this right presents one of the greatest case studies in higher education, because I'm going to piggyback off of Stephanie's point. You're teaching them boundaries. What better way to learn boundaries than, wow, I have 9 million opportunities to choose from. Which one should I pick? To Savannah's point, who do I need to come alongside me in this journey to optimize my success? So one thing I'm thrilled about at Pepperdine is they've allowed me to build a program teaching the student athletes this from top to bottom. And it's a valued-centered program that I'm leading. And it's so cool getting them into class every Monday night and have them saying, oh, I thought I wanted this sponsorship, or I thought that was a great opportunity. But now that I know how to actually weigh these decisions, I don't want to do that. So I'm going to go a little off track. Hopefully Miriam isn't mad. We have an attorney here with us who represents athlete clients. What kind of advisors, besides the education, Savannah, what kind of advisors would you recommend for student athletes in this space?
Absolutely. Thank you for even asking that question, because I think a lot of times when athletes think about having a deal or some form of sponsorship, automatically they're like the emoji with the dollar signs in their eyes, right? But there's so many different people that you need on your team to help you remain protected. And that's why I got my nickname, Protector of Athletes. So a few people that you need to have in your corner is definitely making sure you have a lawyer. You need a financial advisor. And I know financial advisors have gotten such a bad rep, but that's why it's also important, to your point, Alicia, about being educated. Make sure that you do your own due diligence on people, do your own research on people. Don't wait for other people to bring the information to you. Be proactive in this space, because this is your livelihood. And the one thing I love about NIL is that student athletes have a unique ability that many people before them did not have. You have an opportunity to set up your future in a way that you can just be smooth selling, in the future on the back end, right? But it's going to take a lot for that to happen. So you definitely may want an agent, because some agents are out there and able to help you to book certain deals. But whether it's a lawyer, a tax professional, a financial representative, a sports agent, whomever it may be, you should be studying these people. You should be asking them questions. And I think some of the major issues around student athletes, or even just young entrepreneurs, trying to figure out, okay, what questions do I ask, right? Talk to your mentors, talk to the people who are around you, talk to your family. Have they ever hired a lawyer, for example? What are some of the questions that they've asked? Who have they worked with in the past? And if you know someone who's worked with a particular person, ask them about their experience. How did you feel with this person? Did they deliver for you? Because at the end of the day, outside of all of the beauty of having opportunities in NIL, making some money, or even building relationships, what happens if the people that you've pulled now in your circle do you dirty? How do you promote your own interests and protect them in the long run, right? But a lot of that is going to deal with who you even pull in from the get-go. And the last thing I want for athletes to be dealing with is trying to clean up all the mess after something hits the fan.
Love it. Love it. Derek, you were a 7-year NFL veteran, got your MBA. Now you are going to become an agent. Can you just tell us what you looked for in advisors? You're someone who hired advisors and now you're becoming an advisor. What should these people be looking for?
First and foremost, what you're going off of is what we all do when we meet somebody. Can I trust this individual? And you're trying to take that gut level instinct and determine, is this somebody that I can trust? And beyond that, yes, you have to do the due diligence, as Savannah is pointing to. The only challenge with that is a lot of times these athletes, especially at that age, they don't have there's perspective to think, okay, I need to actually put in this work to evaluate these individuals, and it's just new territory for them. So there's going to be a learning curve that they're going to come face to face with, because it's just not natural part of their everyday life. Everything has been handed to them. Everything has been brought to them. What teachers you have, your coaches, I mean, you're insulated, you're protected. And so it's going to present some challenges, but I think that they can overcome them.
I love that you bring up that insularity. I worked with the Alliance of American Football to build a player transition program. And that's where I met Troy. He said, Alicia, these guys have never even picked out their own food. They walk into a cafeteria, everything's there. In some schools, they don't even need to pick out a barber. At the University of Colorado, there's a barber chair. And we use these as recruiting tools, but really what it's doing is it's setting them up for a life where they don't know how to be independent. And so this, I think, NIL presents such a great universe to teach young men and women. I might be putting words into your mouth, Savannah, but teaches them how to be entrepreneurs and how to build a business around something. Maybe it's their athleticism, maybe it's something beyond that. And to me, that's empowering. So Stephanie and Chelsea, you're in the higher ed space. What are you seeing? What are your schools doing related to educating these young men and women on everything we just talked about?
I'm actually happy to say that at Temple University, we have a class that we're offering. I think it's in our School of Hospitality Sport Management. That is, I think there are 4 cohorts, but they are teaching like student athletes the who, what, where, when, and why, and the how of this new space, you know, helping them to develop the playbook, like I said earlier. And that's critical, right? Because, I mean, we don't know what we don't know. And when we don't know, we make a lot of mistakes. Like, how many times have we read the stories about athletes who got involved with some kind of a business venture and then they lost all of the money that they invested in that venture because of a lack of understanding and a lack of knowledge. And so you know, I'm grateful that over here at Temple, we are doing that level of, I mean, once again, we're higher education. We should be teaching students about this stuff. And so that's how we are doing it. And I think it matters where you are, because not all sports, not all schools are experiencing the gold rush, for lack of a better word. For some people, it will come maybe in 3 years from now, once some of these kinks have been worked out. But you know, and that's why, like I said, I'm in an observer role, because actually our students aren't talking that much about it. So I don't know if it's they're not talking about it because they haven't captured the big deals, or they're not talking about it because they're not doing it. They're not taking advantage of the opportunity yet.
Interesting. How about you, Chelsea, Ohio State?
Yeah, you know, I think that we have always provided support for our student athletes who had opportunity to transition to the next level. So through our Gene Smith Leadership Institute, there was a pipeline for coaches and administration to identify our athletes who were on that trajectory, and to provide them with a lot of this type of information that now will be open to all of our student athletes in some respects, and probably should have been, because even if people weren't going to go play in the NFL and the NBA, all of these things were really useful skills that all of our athletes could have used. So I think what's really cool about this is it's actually opening up access to valuable resources to all of our student athletes, because we have a lot of niche sports at Ohio State. And so there are a lot of opportunities for really cool deals. You know, we have a national champion rifle or pistol team. What really cool opportunities for some of those athletes who maybe wouldn't have been identified as that pro pipeline. And so I think that that's a really cool thing. We also now, because it's an NCAA, you know, gotta make sure you're doing all the right things. Everything has to be pre-approved. So everything has to go into a portal. It has to be approved by the department to even be able to do it. So that also allows for some coaching and some education, and for us to identify who's being reached out to for these types of deals, and to guide and shepherd them. We have a big department full of really wonderful people with so many different, you know, degrees and areas of expertise to help in that advisorship stuff, and to help them identify maybe outside advisors that would be helpful. And we also then have the ability for our student athletes to kind of enter into that portal if they're interested in receiving those. So getting some coaching on that end as well in terms of how to manage that. And so, which I think is really great. And again, giving equitable access across sports, across kind of talent level, and hopefully then can be a model that it doesn't matter where you go, it doesn't matter what school you're at, that you'll have access to this information, because we should be setting up every student athlete, even your walk-on who never sees a minute on the field. We should be able to provide them the ability to leave school and be entrepreneurs as well, particularly if their degree program is not necessarily one that does that. Psychology was never going to be a degree program that was going to teach me entrepreneurship, but even someone in a field like psychology should have access to those resources if any of our athletes do. So I'm really excited about the idea that what we're doing now is just going to open up more, and hopefully be a model for everybody to be able to get that experience and those resources.
I love that. So a couple of things. One, Title IX is a nebulous law that really nobody follows and it's not enforced. But the fact that you brought up equity, that's a huge issue for athletics departments as they navigate this space. If you're only providing education and advising to one gender of student athletes, you are walking yourself into a Title IX claim. So you should be doing what Ohio State does. Second, there's this perception that it's only the college athletes who don't know these things that we're discussing, but research shows that only 40% of American university students ever take a financial literacy class. We are living in what's called the Great Resignation, where a research study by Microsoft showed that 54% of Generation Z members plan to quit their jobs. Why do they plan to quit their jobs? During lockdowns and shutdowns, while they were sitting at home, they had a lot of time to think about what brings them joy, happiness, and well-being. And they realized it's not the rat race, it's not grinding, it's not hustling, it's not sitting in traffic, it's doing something that's intrinsic to themselves. So by using this as a model to teach these young people how to take their passion for psychology and build a business around it, you're making your program more marketable, because that's what this new generation of student is looking for. So awesome all around. I want to flip to another thing that came up at the beginning, and it's the potential for some negative team dynamics brewing. What could we be looking at? How can we avoid it? Who would like to speak first? The crowd goes wild. Derek, what could go wrong if your teammate secures $1 million deal and you feel like you're better than him and you're like, where's my money?
I think it could depend on the individual, and it's going to be a case by case thing. I don't think that what happens at one university is going to happen at every university. I would say that there is that potential for someone to be, I guess, jealous, envious of their teammate that received the deal. I don't know if that's really going to have an effect on the field per se. One thing I do look at, I say that when you do have a teammate making $1 million, that could make that other player say, man, maybe I should try pursuing after this social media thing and trying to get that sort of deal. And if you land that sort of deal, you're almost thinking about it as, what do I need football for? Why do I need this education? Why do I need to be at this university if I can make that sort of money? So I think you may have people not even finishing their degree because they look at the opportunity that's in front of them and being a social media creator, that it's more appealing than sticking out and finishing up a college degree.
How do we counteract against that? What is the because to me, the way I see it is, but for football, but for your association with XYZ university, more than likely you wouldn't have these eyes on you and you wouldn't be getting these deals unless you're a really interesting TikTok influencer who can do the dances and no one cares about what you're doing on the field of play. How do we communicate that point? Because I agree with you, we're dealing with young people. Your brain is not fully developed until you're 25 years old. They think they're invincible. How do we communicate to them? No, don't do that. Don't quit. You need to keep going to keep the money coming in.
Yeah, I would be interested in hearing what Chelsea or Stephanie have to say about that, you know, being specialists at the mine.
You know, there's one thing I do know is that like one size does not fit all, but what comes to my mind right now is keeping the student athletes who we work with connected to their goals. Because just because one thing jumps in front of your face doesn't mean you like sidetrack yourself and stop going towards your goal. So, you know, are you here to get a degree? Then you should leave XYZ University with a degree. If perchance you leave with a degree and a deal or 2 or 3 and lots more money, then that's fantastic. But remember your purpose, remember your why. Why did you come here in the first place? NIL is brand new. Like, why did you come here? So that's one way that I would address some of because it really is true. When you pay people to do things that they were doing for free, happily, it is demotivating. And so we really have to think about like, how do you continue to create that motivation? And we do know that setting goals and having a purpose and knowing what your why is, like those are things that make people get up in the morning and go to lift and then go to class and then go do extra shots and then go to study hall. We know that that's how people are motivated. So goals and remembering your goals.
I also think, and maybe this is like this utopic thinking that, you know, I'm occasionally get into. I think that it has the potential to change the system. So I think that universities are going to have to figure out how to retain athletes better. The barber isn't going to be enough. The meals aren't going to be enough. Everybody gets those, right? I've heard countless stories, seen countless experiences where recruiting is like dating. You put your best foot forward. Everything is wonderful. We're a family, rainbows and butterflies. We're going to take care of you. And then you get there and you're like, oh my God, this is not what I expected. But then you're kind of stuck, right? You're on scholarship or you have these goals to play professionally. And so you're kind of stuck. You're stuck with what you got. You can maybe transfer, but like, is that really going to be any better? You don't know. So I think that it has the potential to move old school coaches into new wave thinking of caring about player welfare, about treating our athletes as athletes, about investing in the person beyond just their athleticism, so that we can retain them when these better deals come and they say, I can go make this money. Maybe I didn't come here to get a degree. I know that's, you know, I know that's not maybe what we're supposed to say, but not everybody actually came to get a degree. Many people came for the opportunity for sport, and getting a degree is a bonus. So maybe we will actually have to shift the system, and maybe we will have to shift the system to create a more appealing environment where we'll retain athletes to want to be at our institution rather than chasing the money.
Yeah, I love it. And Miriam just posted some great other potential impacts in the chat that we should take a look at. I mean, you can take this like an economic study. It's a supply and demand issue. It's opening up the marketplace where once Clemson spent $55 million to build a pop-up green, an indoor slide, and a huge cold tub to attract football players to compete at that university. But hopefully these football players aren't falling for that gimmick anymore. And they're saying, no, I want access to the best advisors. And I want to know that when I leave Clemson, I can either make millions of dollars in the NFL, or I can make millions of dollars because you've provided me the knowledge to build generational wealth through a business. Most millionaires in America become millionaires through entrepreneurship. That's how we empower these people. It's such an incredible opportunity. Savannah, where can this go wrong in women's sport teams? Where's the competition? Where are the opportunities for battles lying in NIL?
Oh my gosh. I feel like women athletes have gotten the short end of the stick for so long anyway. Even if they do have scholarships, the spotlight is more than likely not on them. And so one attribute about female athletes, I know being one of them, is that we do have the tenacity to work hard and really, go out there and work for whatever it is that we want. So how do they overcome challenges, especially if another teammate is making more money than them, or have gotten a different NIL deal, or maybe someone from a different team? It can play out so many different ways. And I have to echo what my other panelists have said, but one thing I do want to throw out here is, and I'm going to be the bad guy, sorry, maybe it's just a lawyer in me, but one thing that I was thinking about was Georgia's NIL statute around allowing, I can't remember if it was the athletic association or the school taking up to about 75% of any student athlete's NIL earning and putting it into a pot. And it made me think about when, I think it was Chelsea that said equitable resources or equitable something, but I really thought about that because I'm like, oh my gosh. And coming from being of African-American descent, coming from communities that may not be well-to-do, when you take someone's NIL opportunity, not meaning that they don't want to be a student athlete anymore or want to go to school, but it's like, whoa, I finally have an opportunity, and now you're going to take what I've earned from my hard work. And we know that these athletes don't get to where they are. They don't get full ride scholarships by sitting by and doing nothing. Some of these kids have been groomed since they were in Pop Warner, right? And now here's an opportunity to really succeed at something and see a deal that shows you, wow, I really have worked my butt off for something, and you take that. To me, it creates inequitable issues, especially for people from those communities, because now, like, if we pit one of our African-American or Latino athletes and put them next to one of our Caucasian athletes who may have come from a middle-class family that have not, struggled as much. And I'm not going to say that some people, Caucasian people, don't struggle, because I know it goes, without saying. But historically, Black and Latino athletes have come from communities that did not have the resources that their Caucasian counterparts have. And so to me, that is the biggest negative team dynamic impact that I see with this issue, whether you are female or not. But then there's a new issue too, with our student athletes being more gender fluid. So how do we even balance that? And then how do we balance that with Title IX?
It's paternalistic, it's racist, and most frankly, a law like that is illegal. So email me, maybe we can file a lawsuit together, or we can at least get the word out. I mean,
Awesome.
It's illegal. we have the 13th through 15th Amendments to prove to us that's illegal. When usurping somebody's money that they've earned, the state can't do that.
I can't help but think about, going back to team dynamics, what about departmental dynamics there, right? That you start to create a toxic environment for the entire department, where the department has a budget, and departments have not wanted to pay athletes, right? Regardless of what you think about it, whether you think that's right or wrong, they don't want to do it for a variety of reasons. However, they're going to have athletes pay other athletes, essentially, right, by taking the money in. And so I think from an optics perspective, even at minimum, the idea that a university won't subsidize paying athletes, but other athletes will have to subsidize paying other athletes. Again, talk about departmental dynamics and team dynamics and interpersonal dynamics and the mental health impacts of all of that. I mean, it's a total mind F, right? Even thinking about that. And I mean, I think of the way that, you know, if we want to destroy athletics, college athletics as we know it, that's a great way to get started.
Right, Chelsea. And then, but on top of that too, in a lot of these statutes, the school is saying, well, to even license our IP, because the only way you can even have an NIL deal is you have to be an eligible student athlete at that time. And the only reason why you're getting the NIL deal in the first place is because you are a student athlete wearing that jersey. So now to even do anything that involves the school name or any form of IP, you have to license that from the school, and the statute says at market rate. So we already know that some of these athletes are coming from areas where they can't afford to buy anything at market rate, right? And this, who says that the NIL deal is going to give them a whopping 100K or more, or even 20,000 if that? Honestly, the good thing about NIL is that it provides you an opportunity to really build relationships that will pay dividends in the future. That's really how these athletes should be playing the NIL at this point. Now, it's not about the money, it's about what you can do and generate in the future from that opportunity, right? But if we're going to essentially create a hurdle for these athletes already by saying, okay, if we take their money, if we implement anything like the Georgia statute has, and then the student athlete has to pay this full market rate to even license the IP from the school, that in itself to me is so many mental issues that can come from just the aggravation and the unknown and potential legal risk and pitfalls as a student athlete, on top of just trying to hopefully, you know, secure a good NIL deal.
I think you're getting to an important mental health issue here through the lens of the law. These student athletes celebrated on July 1st thinking, oh my gosh, we have this right. Yay, let's go. But what you're clearly pointing out to us is no, they don't have a full unfettered right. They are not fully free to exercise a right I'm allowed to because I'm not a student athlete. I live in California. California is one of the most prolific developers of the right of publicity, thanks to Hollywood being within our border. They think they have the same right as I do, but because of this paternalism, because of systemic biases, racism, et cetera, the right is not unfettered. And so there's work still to do for people like you and I. I want to shift gears though a little bit to a point that Miriam raised in the chat, that another issue brewing is coaches historically have garnered high wages. I read once that the average NCAA football coach's salary increased in value by 144% over a 5-year window. I asked for a $15,000 raise the other day and got denied, and I work in higher ed. So hopefully my boss isn't listening. If you are, hi. How's that going to play out from a dynamic perspective if your student athlete that you're coaching rolls up with more money than you? Any thoughts on how that's going to play out?
I mean, it has the potential to be disastrous, for being quite open. It has the potential to cause a lot of problems. I mean, as it stands, student athletes feel as though their coach has the power to make their life fill in the blank. And if they perceive that there's yet another thing to make their life fill in the blank, money is going to be could be one of those factors. I don't know how it's going to play out, but all I can say is it's not going to play out well. I don't see how it can, unless you just have all these emotionally intelligent folks. And, to your point earlier, our student athletes are between the ages of 17 and 23 years old in terms of development of the prefrontal cortex. And that's where all your executive function and all that emotional intelligence is built. It's not fully formed yet. And, I heard something probably in the summer about like a student athlete could, now they have 3 jobs. They have their deal, they have their academics, and then they have their sport. Not necessarily in that order, but they have 3 jobs now. And let's just say like the posting's got to happen because of all the, can they say like, I don't want to go to my other job? I think they can't. And what does that then do for the coach student athlete relationship? What does that do for the the student athlete teammate relationship? Those anytime you throw money into things get sticky. And then when you throw a lot of money into it, I just say disaster.
More money, more problems.
I have it written down right here on my paper.
I know you're about to answer, but I just want to call out, you might have had an experience where you were making more than an NFL coach. Like you might have lived this experience.
And now I was thinking about that, just being in the NFL, that typically happens. Players are making more than their coach. And there may have been maybe there was some heat on the other side from the coach, but generally I never noticed that dynamic occurring in terms of, a coach being upset about what a player was making versus him. And I never really saw it play out in the locker room or on the field. But to stand by Stephanie and what she's saying, I do feel that there can be a demotivating factor by you earning that sort of revenue at such an early age. And because for most of the athletes, for everybody up here, getting to the professional level, a big aspect of that is the financial reward that comes with it. And that's a part of the grind. Like that's a part of what helps you deal with the grind. And once you take that away, if I get fed early, you might cut my knees from underneath me and I may not be as motivated.
I think another thing in thinking about the coaches is I spend a lot of time consulting with coaches. We provide coaches education to all of our coaches. And I think that that's one place that college athletics fails, is that we don't provide enough resources to our coaches. Our college coaches in 2021 do far more than coaching. 10 years ago, they were primarily coaching. They do far more than coaching. And so, I think that adding that dynamic in where money matters, where dynamic matters, they're having to deal with the NIL stuff. They're having to deal with team dynamics. They're having to deal with maybe making more, especially in maybe non-football, non-basketball sports. There is a high potential that your athletes are making as much or more than you. I think that we just haven't equipped our coaches to deal with that. And I don't think that's fair. And if we haven't equipped our coaches to deal with it, they're with our athletes 20 plus hours a week. So any mental health intervention that I'm doing or Stephanie's doing with a student athlete whose coach is struggling with this stuff, I can't outdo 20 hours of impact there, right? So in thinking about, what we might cause with coaches is an outrageous demand, and who's supporting them, who's coaching the coaches on this stuff. Certainly no one's experienced it. So who can coach the coaches on it right now? So I think that that's another dynamic in college athletics that, we're going to have to be thinking about, of how do we support our athletes. But again, support the athletes all you want. If the coaches aren't supported, it's going to create a whole new, bizarre, challenging dynamic.
We just had a coaching education meeting today at 11, between 11 and 12, and that came up in our session. So we do these sessions every month, but like literally coaches are like, we need more. We need more training and education to deal with this student athlete in 2021 on top of a global pandemic. And we just had a flood in Philly, so we having natural disasters, just for good measure. So that I think that's a very valid point. The whole system needs to be, the water is rising and everybody's got to rise with it. And we need to raise up the whole system, and that not just coaches, but administrators, student athletes, absolutely, but everybody in the system, because this is new. And you can't treat new with old. So everybody's gotta raise up.
As I'm listening, obviously there's a lot going on, but I'm so excited. The world is changing. I'm a very devout Christian, but some people say we're in the age of Aquarius and that when the page turned 2020, we're coming into this new age. I don't know if I believe that, but I kind of do. There's so much opportunity, and there's so much opportunity for us to unroot deep dug systems and to come into a more beautiful, holistic, united world. And it's so fascinating. You know, they say that sport is a microcosm of society. Nelson Mandela said sport has the power to change the world. It's so fascinating that sport is being a driver of this change and could be a model. One thing that struck me regarding the conversation of student athletes possibly out earning their coaches, as a society, we have not allowed certain people to learn about and talk about wealth, predominantly women and people of color. And if we continue that practice, that's intentional. It's not random that we don't educate these people about how to gain wealth and how to keep wealth. It's a strategy to keep certain people in power. And so if we utilize the tools and opportunities that we've been given to teach people, wealth isn't bad. Wealth isn't something to be fearful of. Wealth is something to gain, because you can change this entire world if you have access to that capital. If we can teach these young people how to do that, we truly can use this moment and this movement to change the world. So I'm going to open it up to see if there's any questions in the chat, or if there's another topic that we want to hit on as the hour comes to a close.
Can I just ad-lib off of what you just said around wealth? You know, sometimes I think, especially for Black and Latin communities, we are still working to build something because our forefathers didn't have anything to give us. So one of the things that my husband and I have done differently for our son is setting up a life insurance policy where we don't have to pay after he's 21, and the dividends itself will fund the insurance policy. And he can take that money out cash free. He can go to school with it. He can buy a house with it. He can get married, whatever it is that he wants to do. And it also builds a huge cash pot for a death benefit as well. You know, it's important that the schools around NIL start giving these athletes all of the tools to be successful with NIL. You know, part of me writing this book and wanting to speak to student athletes has been me reaching out to schools saying, look, I want to educate your student athletes, because it's more than just the money. There's so many aspects of this that if we don't do what Stephanie said, get out of the old and start with the new, start putting people in places that can properly educate these student athletes, we're going to see the same problems with the professional athletes repeat themselves over in the college phase. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create a generation of student athletes who are going to go into their lives after college with way more issues. Because at the end of the day, like, these student athletes are, like Stephanie said, some of them are minors. We're already putting so much on them. But if we don't have the actual resources to educate them properly, we will be doing a disservice to them. Not just to them, but anything else that they breed after that, because you can only do what you know. But we have to take the responsibility and provide them with the adequate resources to do that. It's simple. Get somebody in there to talk about life insurance. You know, I was, for my book launch, one of the hosts had said something about, and I hope I'm quoting her properly, that student athletes tend to wear their legacy on their feet. And I laughed because I'm like, whoa, that's real. But if we talk about insurance, you could go and get a term life insurance policy for $10 a month, you know, and if you have an NIL deal that's paying you, what happens? You are actually building something, some form of wealth for your future. So I just wanted to add that.
In the chat, Tim asks, is educating student athletes in college too late? And I think that's a fascinating question, because arguably 3 months ago, we didn't think it was too late. We could counteract sudden wealth effect in the major leagues if we teach them in college. When does this need to take place? When does the education, and where does the education need to take place?
Isn't the saying the best time to plant a tree was 100 years ago, the second best time is today? You know, I think that that rings true for everything, right? My job would be so much easier if we taught people resiliency and we taught people mental health strategies at age 5. My kid watches Daniel Tiger, and so she the other day needed to go sit on a bench to calm down. I was like, okay, kid. You know, that we don't teach people to self-regulate. We don't teach people about finances. So it's never too late, right? I started saving for retirement way too late, but better late than never. So, you know, I think that absolutely, if we could start this stuff in high school, we'd set these kids up so much better. And it's not going to happen tomorrow. It's probably not going to happen in a year. It's probably not going to happen in 5 years for us to have the funds and the staffing to be able to provide widespread education before someone gets to college. So I do think that the collegiate space needs to take on that responsibility, because if we say, oh, well, you know, it's too late, then when, right? Then they're not getting it. And so, yes, I think if we can start at the college level doing this type of education, supporting our athletes in these ways, beyond a one-off financial literacy, you know, 45-minute lecture that everyone's mandated to go to and no one's listening to, if we actually provided useful sessions and intervention and hands-on type of stuff in my space, that sets the model to make it feasible. It sets a blueprint. We can try to make it financially feasible to move it younger and younger and younger. But again, like a tree, we have to start somewhere, and the collegiate space is the next best place to start if we can't get them to start this stuff in 9th grade.
And I do think tools like Instagram and TikTok, where not every influencer is great, but you have these like life coaches. And once upon a time, a lot of us could not afford having the services that Stephanie and Chelsea provide and people like them provide. But social media, for all of its faults, has really opened up access to education and indirect mentorship in this space. Does anyone else want to touch on that question? Okay.
Me, I was just going to say the sooner the better. I think as soon as people start touching money or whatever, you know, whatever it is that they use, or it's a card. I mean, student athletes don't touch money. And that's a whole nother issue kind of, but as soon as they start engaging and interacting with money, we should start having conversations about money, how to keep money, how to save money. And, you know, I think we also need to kind of address our beliefs about money, because really and truly, there are people who believe if you talk about money, that's a little bit tacky, but then those people probably don't have, you know, like, because you have to talk about money to learn how to invest money. Like that doesn't just happen through osmosis. And so the people who think that probably don't have as much money as the people who talk about money. So we need to talk about it.
There's so much to unpack there. I'm currently writing a book about confidence and how confidence is the secret weapon to wield success with. But I think a lot of this is self-imposed learning and knowing that you're not going to learn everything you need to learn in school. No teacher is going to direct you to every lesson you need to be taught. You need to curate your own journey to gather the information you need to optimize your life. But our education system is broken at the lower levels, where we're no longer teaching students how to critically think. We're teaching them how to take tests and how to respond to perfectly curated environments. So when these students get to my class, and I teach at a top 50 university, they don't even know how to come up with their own original idea. And if you don't know how to come up with your own original idea, you don't know what information you're even needing. So there's a lot to unpack there. There's a lot of fingers to point. But at the end of the day, we are all the stewards of our own lives. But it takes confidence to believe that you are deserving of more than the situation you find yourself in. And that's where mentors, positive affirmations from others, looking at someone who came out of the situation you were in and seeing what they've achieved can all facilitate better paths forward. Miriam has an incredible question that is so rooted in what Athlete Soul does with athletes transitioning out of sport. The question is, athlete self-worth is tied to performance, and it seems that name, image, and likeness will reinforce that by tying identity to performance and influence. How do we counteract that? That's a really great question.
I'll go first on that one. The quickest answer is purpose. And I think sometimes people may not feel like they know what their purpose is because they've been groomed to do one thing for so long. But honestly, like if you don't even feel right about what you're doing and the stressors about performing well is the only thing that you think about, maybe that's not the right place for you. But one way I want people to really start thinking about, how do I find my purpose? If there was one thing that you could do and not get paid for it, what exactly would that be? What do you do every day that makes you just giddy and get goosebumps, for no reason? What is that? Is it helping the person on the corner? Do you like giving? Find a place where you can be a giver, helping people. Do you like to, like one thing I did as a high school student, I went through so much. And so I'm pretty multifaceted, but I wrote a lot of songs and I wrote poetry and all kinds of stuff. I didn't get paid for that stuff, but it was something I love doing and actually still love doing because clearly I've been writing books, but what do you really like doing that you would do for free? Remove the sport, remove everything out of your way that might be causing you to be distracted away from what that is. Once you remove that stuff and really just strip off all of those titles and labels that you feel like you need to fit into, I guarantee you that you will start to put the pieces together around who you are as a person and what truly makes you happy, because that is the way that you're going to be able to move through life feeling unscathed and uncheated if you know exactly who you are and what you're supposed to be doing.
Ditto, ditto. I was gonna say purpose, but then just, and when you get to the end of your life, if you've lived a life of purpose, I don't know, I haven't gotten to the end of my life yet, but I'm trying to live a life of purpose. And I anticipate that when I look back, I won't have any regrets. And so I think, because that's being true to yourself, your talents, your abilities, the things that you think that the people, the things that you think are important or important you value. So I think purpose, just ditto on that.
And I'll add on to it because with the NFL, there's been some players that have done research on a guy named Ken Ruckers. He played for the Green Bay Packers for a number of years. And after he retired and he was going through his transition from the NFL to his second career, he sat down and interviewed over 100 former players trying to find out about their transition and what they experienced and what they went through. And what he uncovered was the fact that when you get done with that sport and you're no longer playing it anymore, it's as if a death occurred in the family. It's no longer a part of you. And for all of our athletes, what you do on the field, your performance, the influence that you have, it's essentially a part of who you are. Yes, your identity is wrapped up in it. I don't really think that you try to deter somebody from finding their identity in it. It's so much a part of who you are. You spend so much time with it. It's like in a relationship. As we stated, I think Chelsea made a comparison to that, but it's as a relationship where you're giving it time, effort, commitment, day in and day out. So when it leaves, it's gone, and so you have to grieve. And what they told us was that that's how you get over it. It's not about trying to avoid it. It's going to hit you, and there's going to be an occurrence where you're going to suffer, and you may experience depression. Like he talked about himself. There'd be days that he just didn't shower. He just had on the sweats. The team issued sweats for days because he was depressed. So it's about acknowledging, yes, you may go through that. And then on the back end, having the professionals that you can speak to, that sports psychologists, the therapists that can help you get through that process and help you find what I believe we're all saying too, that purpose, the next purpose. And that's what's big. And this is a part of why I want to be an agent, is to sit in that role with the player, to be proactive about helping them position themselves to take advantage of the career so that when you're done and it's time to transition, you've taken as much from the game as the game is taken from you and you're prepared to transition.
I love that. And I think it's so what Derek's saying about athlete identity and athlete transition from sport is a flare or a signal to the schools who are investing in NIL education, because a lot of the people leading this NIL education know nothing about athlete identity nor athlete transition from sport. And they're walking into these classrooms and they're like, all right, let's build $1 million brand, let's get rich. And they're setting the athletes up for the possibility of sudden wealth effect, or to Miriam's point, to destroy their identity or root their identity in something that's not pure and it's not true to their purpose. Not to plug myself, but to plug myself. That's what I love about the program that I've built at Pepperdine is I've worked with the NBPA, I've worked with professional athletes, I've worked with the football league. And so the student athletes think that I'm teaching them how to make money on NIL. And if they pay attention, some of them will. But what I'm really doing with them over 10 weeks is I'm creating an exercise that helps them understand their identity is so much bigger and broader than sports. I remember in my research, when I was working for the NBPA to help them build the player transition program, I sat down with a leader from the USOC, and at the USOC, they do an exercise where the person has to like spin rope for 2 minutes and talk about themselves. And they can't say anything about themselves that's rooted in athletics. You know, so they have to talk about themselves, but you're not allowed to say anything rooted in athletics. Most people can't do that. Think about that for your own life. I'm navigating the dating world. I go into dates and what I start talking about is my career. I'm not my career. I'm so much more than that. So I think so many of us have this problem that if we could teach this group how to overcome it, wow, that's awesome. So I love that example, Derek. I love that your heart is being led in that way to serve others. I love the work that Miriam does and Athlete Soul does. Any other thoughts on identity?
I have one quick follow-up because I love what both of you have said. But Derek, I also did research prior to publishing my first book, What Are You Sporting About, with professional athletes, because my goal was to really see what were some of the key issues that a lot of them suffered. And I do think the biggest part was identity, but also getting in bed with business, getting in bed with people who didn't really have business acumen or them understanding themselves. And it added to that mental health issue that a lot of them were facing and even trying to transition from that. But one thing that I've recognized, especially from student athletes and those that have been groomed since our early ages, they can't understand that they are more than an athlete. If you ask them, who are you? They will say, I'm an athlete. But you're not technically an athlete in the sense of who you are as a person. Being an athlete is what you do. It's not necessarily who you are, right? And so if we can start to pull those labels away from the identity and think about who you are as a person, like what I believe in, you know, what is it that I want for my life or for my future? It may not be athleticism. It may not be sport. It doesn't mean that you can't work in the sport or in some kind of capacity, but that shouldn't be the only way that you identify or to even define who you are.
Sorry, Chelsea, go ahead.
I was going to say that I think that there's an interesting thing that I talk with athletes about as well, in terms of, you know, thinking about the complexities of identity and an activity we identify with versus a core identity in terms of who we are. And I always give them the example that people in my life will be like, oh my gosh, Chelsea, you're such an athlete. And I'm like, I am very inactive. Like as a general like lifestyle these days, I have a 3-year-old, I'm very inactive, but it is always going to be part of who I am in terms of like my repertoire of activities, right? I was a college diver, did some sprint triathlons through grad school. And again, last 3 years have done next to nothing, but it's this idea that something can be a part of our story a part of our activity choices, a part of what we do without being all of who we are. And so I often talk with them about that, because all of my athletes will also, they view me as an athlete, and I don't identify that way anymore, right? So it's really talking about kind of the onion layers of, yes, you peel it back and that's there, but how do we make sure that we cut through that onion and name those layers, name them, see them, understand them, because they're there. We just tend to have that recency effect, right? We more strongly remember something that has most recently occurred in our life, which is probably 20 million practices in the last month. And so it's really saying, okay, yes, and not either or, not only, it's all the yes ands. And so walking people through those activities, help them to deepen that. And then I can challenge them, how can we invest in some of those other identities as well?
I love that. We have another question from Darren. Darren is the Chief Marketing Officer at Athletes in Action. He works with professional and college athletes. He wants to get a sense of what the general terms are of the deals that the college athletes are entering into. I'm not sure if anyone here has seen a deal sheet for an NIL deal, but if anyone can speak to what it says.
So I've seen some, I can't talk specifically about things because attorney-client privilege and all of that jazz, but I think the contracts are going to vary a lot depending on the athlete, the third-party company who wants to do business with the athlete. And one thing that I always educate my clients on, my business clients or athletes, is that the payment, the compensation for a contract, it may not even be money. It could be something different. It can be bartering of services. And so the payment for, because I think that was one of the questions, how much are these students being paid? The payment could vary drastically. It could be maybe someone is being paid in products, you know, or maybe someone is being paid to come into a room to, you know, with high key people. You have to look at what that contract is for that student athlete, and really understand what it is that they're asking that student athlete to do. And I always emphasize that you want to know, especially for my student athletes, you want to know exactly what your scope of services are going to be. You want to know when this contract is supposed to end. And that's also important because in a state like here in Illinois, I think the limitation, the NIL statute has a provision where it talks about an NIL contract not being able to extend a certain time once that student athlete is done with their team activities or something or another. I can't quote it accurately right now. So you want to look at that. You want to look at what your state statute says. You want to look at what the contract is and make sure that the contract does not violate the terms, the school terms or the state statute terms, because then you just may be creating a whole bucket of mess on that. But yeah, compensation is going to vary depending on the athlete, depending on the third party company.
That's awesome. And Darren, if you're looking for more info on that, there's a website created by a woman named Christy Dosh called businessofcollegesports.com. And she has an excellent name, image, and likeness tracker where she's tracking the deal. She doesn't get into all of those specifics with everyone, but gives you a good understanding. Okay, I think this might be a great question to end with, unless somebody else pops into the chat. But the question is this: what specific things would you like to see in a course discussing building a brand while balancing student athlete duties? You know, what would be on your wish list? This is from Aaron.
I would like to see at least one topic, one class dedicated to prioritizing the person responsible for making the money or doing the deal, or so something in the sleep hygiene area or the self-care area, or learning how to take breaks from just breaks, like learning how to take breaks. What a novel concept, but something that prioritizes the person, not the activity of making, earning, doing, but the person responsible for doing that, because we have to put ourselves first in order to be able to do all this.
I would like to see more conversations around resilience. I think our student athletes are great with performing for whatever their sport is. But when it comes to having to step out of the norm, things that they may not be that comfortable with, sometimes we can see the courage or the confidence and the resilience piece really lack. And so I think that is a necessary conversation that we should be having with our student athletes.
You may even have a course for exactly that, building a brand, so that they understand exactly how to build a brand and they don't waste their time doing things that don't work. You know, they have an actual plan and execution behind it. And you can even hire the proper expert that you can perhaps bring on if you have the resources to obtain that and get the help that you need to build a brand.
I also think accessing resources. So, as people start to build brands, start to see maybe money come in, start to figure out who they are and what they're about, also how to access resources. I think that that's a really undervalued piece that most people don't know how to do that. I know that our athletes, when they graduate, are like, how to make a doctor's appointment? How do I find a therapist? How do I pick up a bank? How do I so really accessing resources? Who are the people you call for what? How do you manage that stuff? Especially in theory, as someone gains maybe a little bit more financial independence and financial stability, how do you know where to go for what when you can afford to do so, right? A lot of our kids also don't know how to access resources because they've never been able to. They can't afford to go to the various services that they could use. And then they come to college and we provide them with call your athletic trainer, they'll connect you with anyone. Let's now teach them, how to utilize all of the things that will be at their fingertips as they move into adult life.
Miriam, yeah, you have some great ideas.
Well, I was actually going to say that I see this whole NIL experiment as a great opportunity to do what all you've been talking about, which is educate our athletes better, which will help them develop beyond sport, which in terms, will help them be able to transition better away from sport into another career. So it seems that they are now going to be receiving a lot more education on soft skills and just personal development elements in general. And I see these as really helpful in any way for their life in general.
It's so true. And you know it so well from your experience as an Olympian to your role in an NGB to now leading Athlete Soul. This has been fantastic. I've learned so much from each of you. We've had great interaction from the attendees. This conversation isn't going to end anytime soon. So I really give Miriam and Athlete Soul credit for coming up with a novel panel topic and going into a space that I haven't seen yet. So thank you all for joining us. I'm going to return the mic, if you will, to Miriam.
Thank you, Alicia, for moderating the panel. Thank you, everybody, for participating. I agree with you, Alicia, obviously, that this is a topic that we're going to be seeing and discussing for a while. And perhaps we'll regroup at some point to revise what we just said today and see if there's any more insight that can we gain. But in the meantime, I want to make sure that you all know we're going to be sharing this recording with you, so you'll have it and can go back to it. I will also make sure that you know where to reach all of our panelists and you can get in touch with each other. I think we had some really interesting participants as well, so a good opportunity to share on the topic. So yeah, watch out for that email that will come, and I'm sure we'll have some further conversation on that topic. All of you, thank you so much for your time and insight. This was great. Thank you, thank you, thank you.